Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Resident Alien. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I wasn't expecting the episode to play out the way it did, especially with the whole Harry situation. I was kind of like, okay, so we got Liv and Mike in here, and they're looking for Harry, and they're trying to shoot him. He's like, oh, catch me. And then and I love that immediately Mike is like, oh, it must be a werewolf or something. It's good, silver bullet in your ass. And Asta's like, don't hurt him. And it's like, oh, it's not him, isn't it? And it's like, oh, he's an alien. And then we hard cut to Liv and Mike in a restaurant, and she's like, oh, how about more bacon? Or more how about pay upgrade, a raise. And he's like, yeah, you're right, more bacon. And it's like, Liv can never catch a break because she's always smiles and takes like whatever BS that people throw her way, especially Mike. She's too nice for her own good. But at first I was almost thinking like, right, did Harry trap them in some mind loop thing or something? I was like, what's going on? And the moment Asta and Harry walk in, it was like, did they explain things to him or what? And it's like, right, Harry got inside of their minds and warped their memories. He made it seem like, oh, like some big shot FBI agent came to take over the case. And yep, everything's good. Stop looking into it. And I even love Asta being like, yeah, like, I saw your alien form. Why didn't you ever wipe my or mess with my memories? He was like, because I wasn't alone anymore. I was like, oh. I was like, that's actually a really beautiful reason of like, yeah, because he's always had an affinity for Asta. Like, I mean, it's shown that the fact is that she's the only human he cares about. But it's like, yeah, because he's always liked her. And then, like, he'd rather... it makes you wonder, was it because, once again, like, how much of this is from the comics? Or, like, does he have that ability in the comics and they decide not to use it? Or did they decide to write that to make it even more heartwarming of, like, oh, he could have done this to Asta at any point in time, but he chose not to because he likes her. Because he didn't have to feel so alone. I mean, like, the only other person that knows your secret is Sahar and Max, and you don't care for either one of them. But, yeah, Asta's the only one you care about. So, her knowing is fine, and everyone else, it's a complication. Which I'm also curious, like, will it eventually end with everyone finding out and him keeping the truth of, hey guys, I'm an alien? I was so curious, like, what they were going to do with it. I wasn't expecting it to be, like, a mind wipe situation, so that was interesting. So, that wasn't actually the beginning of the episode, because I am forgetting the opening, which is actually kind of cute and adorable to know, like, well, I guess it's like when you've grown up in the small town of Patience, it is that thing of, oh, everyone knows everyone, which I kind of understand. I grew up in a super small town. Like, the town I grew up in, like, you could literally drive 2 minutes in any direction, you're in a new town. Like, it was just like, it's like a small country town, like, in the middle. Like, the only thing that my hometown has is 2 churches, which are basically like the 30-second drive from each other, a high school, and a post office. Everything else is just nearby towns. Like, once you cross over, like, you go 2 minutes in this direction, and suddenly you're in a new city. That's where all the stores and stuff are. I'm going on a tangent, but the whole point is, like, right, you grow up in a small town, like, everyone knows anyone, so it's kind of cute to know, like, right, we've all been kind of in each other's lives so long. We see, like, a young Judy and Darcy and Ben and Liv and Asta. So it was actually pretty dope just to be like a reminder of that. They probably talked about it in season 1, but I didn't remember it. But it's that thing of like, usually when you grow up in a small town, you typically stay there. I've only left my small town for extenuating circumstances. Opportunities and situations just happen to lead to me being where I am currently. So if not, I probably would be one of those people. It's like, I'd still be back home if it wasn't for like extenuating circumstances. You never know how life is going to play out. So that's also the complicated thing too, because that also plays into Darcy's story, because she had an out, but life threw a wrench in her life and she ended up back here. But nevertheless, what was interesting though is that, and I think they were probably already setting up that theme of like, cool, Liv said something and it's like, oh, you have to raise your hand. It's like, well, Ben did. And he's like, yeah, but Ben's learning to be more like assertive or something. It's like, yeah, I think it's also because he isn't like that at all now too, which is ironic. I think he probably always wasn't. But I think that fits the theme of the episode. Just like, yeah, like women kind of get told to be a certain way and this and that. Like, it is a major theme throughout the episode, which I thought was like, oh, that's actually interesting. I didn't really think about it until like when you piece everything together, you're like, oh, wow, it's like every storyline this episode had to deal with that. So that was interesting. But I thought was fascinating though is like Liv saw something, and this was like 4 years ago or something like that. She saw something that looked like a spaceship, and the guy that was he's like, Liv, what do we tell about liars? I'm like, what? Shut up, you. What are you talking? Ben literally said like, oh, there's something over here. Everyone went, and Liv was like, no, I'll look after the fire. And she saw something, and you're going to come back and tell her she's a liar. But Austin's like, oh, did you see something? She's like, and then the guy's looking at her, and she's like, no, I didn't. I'm like, who the hell is he? What? You, that's stupid. But I guess that's supposed to be the point. But it's like, which is interesting because we keep diving into that. There have been other people besides Harry, well, other of his species who've come to this planet before. Oh, to be fair, we also know it's like, right, there are other aliens that are technically on this, like, obviously, like, well, they've been here, like, you know, like the octopus is voiced by Nathan Fillion. Like, granted, that's a whole different thing, but they're ancestors that landed here all those years ago. But, like, we know the general has been searching for aliens because she saw one at the lighthouse decades ago. And then, obviously, a couple decades later, Liv ended up seeing one as well. So, I think that speaks volumes that they're doing it and making it so that... Because Liv, the moment she found out Harry was in it, she's like, I always knew it was true, you know? So, I thought that was kind of fascinating. So the fact that they introduced that in an opening like that, it isn't just about Liv being like, oh, I knew about aliens, but it does seem like that might be set up for something else. Like, they've popped in on this planet from time to time. You know, like I said, Harry's just like the latest instance. So, like, could it be introducing the fact is, because the ship that the general saw left when it came here, but we don't know about the one that Liv saw. We only saw it from the bottom. So, I mean, we don't even know if that's... Because it had a yellow glow to it instead of green like Harry's, like... The ship Harry had, or even the ship that the general saw, was from, like, Harry's people. So that might have been a different alien species, like a rival. He's talked, like, shit about other aliens before. So it could be one of the other species he's mentioned. Maybe one he hasn't. Maybe it's, like, a rival to him. Just like the Kryptonians have the... God, what were they called? They're not... Were they Daxamites? Was that their names? Or am I pulling that from something else? Like, Mon-El's people in Krypton, like... Kara's people and Mon-El's people always had issues. Like, I'm curious if it's going to be, like, a dynamic similar to that or not. We'll see. Like I said, just the fact is it was yellow makes me feel like that was the case. Not unless I'm... But, yeah, like, everything about Harry's ship and what we've seen so far of his species seem like they glow green, but it could be, like, a different ship, but that could have just been a different thing. But it seems like that could be, like, small setup for something further in the season. But, obviously, the big part of everything is Harry... You know, obviously, like, Asa's telling him to walk in a mile in someone else's shoes because of, once again, the way he kind of treats people and the way he acts and stuff like that. So, I love that it's like, right, like, he's trying to figure out, like, work out, you know, humans. They don't have the technology he needs to make his device to act as a radio to contact his people. And then she's like, oh, what about E.T.? He did that. And she's like, no, E.T. was an idiot. A sexy... beautiful, but he was an idiot. I was like, I love that. Like, oh, I wonder, is it just Harry or would his entire species find E.T. it's attractive? Nevertheless, also I love that it's like, cool, the poison. Oh, because I remember what brought that whole conversation about up, because she's like, right, now you know the truth that Sam was murdered by the real Harry. I killed your friend's murderer. You know, she's like, yeah, but you're still a murderer yourself. He's like, no. I murder murderers, which, interesting timing. I mean, granted, it's been done for a little while now, but, you know, Dexter came back and he's like, oh, he was a murderer of murderers. It's like, doesn't make you a good guy, you know? So I thought that was kind of fascinating because Harry believes like, no, I'm in the right because I killed the bad guy. Because we still, once again, based on what Liv and Mike have discovered, it does seem like he could potentially be a hitman. Potentially is kind of a theory they had. We won't get any potential clarity on that until probably like whoever hired him to do that. Because it's like, oh, his wife Abigail had nothing to do with it. It's like, she could have technically hired someone else to do it just to cover up the fact is so that nothing would directly connect to her. So she could still be guilty, or it could just be like whoever like set that up to have Sam murdered. Because we never found out, like, what that would be. Other than his wife, we don't know who else is benefiting from that. So someone else might have set that up. So whoever hired Harry for that might come knocking, asking, like, yo, like, oh, here's your next assignment. Here's, you know, like, whoever, like, brokers those deals, potentially. If he is, like, a assassin for hire of sorts, you know, or whether there was like extenuating circumstances. Because we know someone paid him a large amount of money so that he could end up paying off the debt and ended up getting his cabin back. So they're still tied, like that's resolved, but mysteries and things associated with that still need to be like tied up, because you know Mike and Liv aren't going to be looking into it for now, but maybe something else is going to correlate and draw them back into it, or at the very least, like I said, is going to come knocking at Harry's door eventually. But I do wonder what they did do with the stuff that was used to kill Sam. Like, Austin was like, you can't just throw it in the trash. And he's like, did you not get to those parts of Law and Order? And it's like, who's the idiot now? And he's like, still E.T., despite being so sexy. But still. So I do like that a big part of this episode is a girls' night. Like, everyone got together. I love that Kate was helping Ben film that thing. And it's like, cool, looking for synonyms other than like, because he was looking for like something other than like, oh, the mortality rate. And it's like, oh, bloodshed, this and that. It's like, okay, like, how about we just avoid the whole death angle? And so no matter how much she tried to record it and stuff like that, it just, yeah, trying to, you know, boost patients' places. Like, yeah, like, yo, everything's down. It's like, yeah, our, God, what was it? Essentially because they legalized marijuana, like, kind of like, I guess, like, the hardcore drugs are a little bit more down. So I love that, and the whole situation about the kinky roleplay stuff that they do, BDSM, and Max is like, oh, what is that? Is that a new game? It's like, no. He's like, can I play it with you and your cousin? He's like, no! Oh. But I think Kate gets a little freaky about that, because she's like, she likes living on dangerous, because he's like, you know, you shouldn't put that in cloud. And she's like, what's someone going to hack into it and see? And it's like, we know, like, the cloud is super hackable, and plenty of people sadly have had their stuff like blasted on the internet. But like, Kate loves living on like, it awakens something in her. And based on the conversation when she's hanging out with the ladies, like, apparently when Kate gets super drunk, like she has an alter ego. So it seems like Kate's got that in her and it's been there, but she's kind of buried it down, being like, oh, I've got to be the responsible wife and mother. I'm also like the wife to the mayor. So like, there's almost like a prestige of like, she had to kind of keep up a certain image. And we even find out she talks about like, cool, she used to be a lawyer, but she had to basically give that all up to be a wife and mother. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm super happy about it. And she immediately takes a shot. You're like, wow, that's wild. So, but I do love that everyone's getting together. I even love that Judy shows up and you're like, how does she always know? Like, did you contact her? No. How does she know? She always knows, and she just shows up. I love it. But also at the same time that's happening, it's kind of like a dude's night where you have Ben as well as Mike and Mike's dad. And I love the whole thing of just like Ben just saying that line of, do you have any beer with rat poison in it? Because it's like, okay, and he confesses to what happened between him and Darcy. And it's like, he's like, maybe I should tell my wife. And Mike is like, no, you're stupid. Look at this guy. Don't tell your wife. And he's like, yeah, but maybe it's for the best. And, you know, even Mike's dad's like, no, maybe he should. He's like, no. Mike's like, there's certain things you probably should just take to your grave. And he's like, all right, you know what, you want to write her? He's like, oh, maybe I'll write her a note. And I love Mike's, like, roundabout thing, because I was like, okay, where are we going with this, Mike? He's like, basically, okay, go to a rice guy. You guys who write messages on grains of rice, where you get him to write that on it, you put it in a bullet, you go home, you get in the tub, you put it in the gun, you get you a phone book, not the patient's phone book, maybe something thicker like the Denver phone book. Then you put the phone book to one side of your head, you put the gun to the other side of your head, pull the trigger, then the bullet is going to fly into the book, hit a D for dumbass, and she's going to find your confession there. He's like, but I'm going to be dead. And he's like, and you're going to be dead either way. I'm like, I love he went on such a diatribe. That was a whirlwind of like I said, where the hell are we going with this metaphor you're creating, Mike? I was like, and that's where we end up. I was like, yes. The actor Corey Reynolds, he had to have so much fun with that. Like, that was just like, that was a lot too. I wonder how much of a like, because I didn't pay as much attention to the scene, because I'm curious like how much editing they had to do, like maybe even ADR some of that. I'm just curious like how like, because that's such a very like specific wording thing to say and having to repeat. Like I get tongue tied with some of the stuff I record like that. Like, and I'm not trying to make any correlations between what he's doing and what no, it's beside the point. But I just think it's so interesting, like, that much dialogue just for that purpose of just, like, for that roundabout metaphor. I loved it. It was so good. I even love that his dad's beside him laughing. And part of me was wondering, like, is that just a character thing? Or was like, no, like, the actor who's playing his dad just, like, bust out laughing because, like, everyone was kind of a little caught off guard by it. I even love later on, it's just kind of like, Ben's like, so, what was that you said about that rice guy? Just like, he's just going ahead and blow my brains out. I even love, like, Judy was kind of, like, grinding on Mike a little bit. Even Liv, like, no, go ahead and dance with her. And it's like, okay. Even his dad pushing him, he's like, Dad, don't push me off the stage. He's like, no, go ahead and dance with the lady. That would have been cute. But I love while all this is happening, because, like, Harry hit it off with Kate's cousin, Carlin, who's played by Alex Borstein, because I noticed her name in the opening credits. I was like, Alex Borstein! Which I think it's Borstein. Maybe it might be Borstein, but I've always said Borstein. I could be mistaken. But, yeah, things I best know her from is, like, obviously growing up, Mad TV, obviously. It wasn't until watching Family Guy for years and years that I finally found out, wait, Alex Borstein from Mad TV voices Lois Griffin. If you never knew that, now you know. I'm sure that's probably like super public knowledge, but it shocked me when I learned. I was like, oh, I didn't know she voiced Lois. That's crazy. More recently is Marvelous Miss Maisel. I think it's the most recent thing she's worked on. Obviously, I know that because it's just like, there's also like, I haven't seen the season. I've seen ads for the season 4 trailer. I haven't really just actively watched it because I've heard nothing but good things about the show. I've just never watched it. I don't know if she's still in it or not. Maybe she is, but either way, I was just excited to see her in this, and I love the whole dynamic between her and Harry, and him trying to be all, like, suave towards her and stuff like that. It's so good, and Asta's like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm trying to, like, manipulate her into giving me this. I even love later on, she's like, you don't manipulate someone. He's like, I'm not manipulating her, I'm charming her so I can get what I want. It's like, you know... but I love that back and forth that they have, and he's like, oh, what's this smell? Like, what's this perfume you got? She's like, oh, Jergens. It's like, she has to, like, scrub herself because of, like, what her work does and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, it's delectable. And she talks about, like, oh, he's like, oh, maybe you could steal that thing from me. He's like, do it. She's like, oh, you're funny. He's like, yeah, but security's tight there. And she was basically like my vagina. He's like, your vagina's like a lab? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, I was like, dude, this is so good. This is so freaking good. And he's like, oh, I can sense it. You're aroused. I even love it because it comes up about like, oh yeah, Graham was kind of saying like, oh, she wants you and she kind of likes Harry, so she thinks you and Harry should have babies. Asta's like, gross, no. And I'm like, because I always kind of thought that was going to be potentially where that goes, like an Asta and Harry thing. I think they are just friends. Whether they'll just stay that way, who knows? But I always kind of got an inkling like that was kind of a direction they were going to go with that. So, but I love, like, kind of like the drunk ladies' night, everyone going off celebrating. What is it? What do they call? It's not a boat, but it's basically something of us that they get into and go somewhere and get drunk. And then Liv is like, yeah, but they called it the yacht, and it's like, yeah, but it's not an actual boat. But like Liv is like, yeah, but I do like end up always throwing up there, so it's almost like being on a boat. And I also love that Kate got so drunk and she's talking about like the nasty stuff her and Ben do, and they're like, wait, Ben, the same dude does the candles, and she's like, oh, the candles isn't the only thing that wax is for. She's like, that's why I've got an ice dildo in our freezer, and then like Max thinks it's just for drinks. I'm like, dude, because everyone's like, whoa, had no idea Ben was quite the animal. So, but I love them kind of getting drunk and celebrating. But then we find out from Liv, it's like, oh, cool, like her SO gets, it's like, oh, like, he's buying this and that. And it's like, wait, what about you? Like, you deserve a car. She's like, yeah, but he makes more than me. He's like, whoa. How does John make more than you, considering the fact is that you, literally put your life on the line the entire time? And it's like, no, we're going to figure this out. And so they go check out the records, they break in, and I love that Judy's pissing on the plant. She's like, oh, no one's going to find out. So they look at the pay gaps, and I love it's like, oh, this person makes more than, it's like, oh my God, your pay is awful. It's like, oh, so-and-so does, I forgot, like Kate knows who it is, and it's like, oh yeah, this person makes double you, and Kate's like, what the fuck? and they immediately stroll down the street drunk, and they confront Ben. They wake him up. He's like, oh, wake up. And they're like, no, this isn't a nightmare. And it's like, oh, you're going to fix this pay gap thing. He's like, I bet. And she's like, you're going to do that. And he's like, okay, honey. And so I like that being I think, it's a very real issue that they did in a very, like, comical and really weird and crazy way of kind of getting that theme across in this episode. But it's like, right, the whole, like, not listening to people thing, especially because Harry has that. To be fair, we don't really know what, like, I don't know if he's ever really going too much into the dynamics of, like, what his people is like. I don't know why I said it like that. What his people are like when it comes to, like, that. Well, obviously we know he liked children and he had a wife, but we never really kind of going into, like, how the genders, like, I think Harry talked about it a little bit, like, in the season 1, if I remember correctly. Do correct me. I believe he talked about it a little bit, that there's not, like, the issue that is here on Earth. Like, they don't have that same issue on his planet. I could be mistaken. So maybe that's also why he has that perspective. But to be fair, it's also Harry. He's an asshole. He thinks he knows better than all of you, man, female. He's not going to listen to anyone else because it's like, cool, like, you are all meat bags that are a means to an end to me. I don't care about any of you. The only reason why I'm trying to save all of you by sending my people away is by having help because of Asta, which I love. After the whole confrontation with Ben, Asta stopped by Harry's, and he disguises himself as Carlin, and it's like, Asta's like, this is kind of messed up, like, look at the state she's in, it's almost like she's dead, this isn't right, you can't, like, just, like, control someone's body like that. And it's like, she wanted me to control her body with my penis. Also, it's like, right, oh, Asta, can you teach me how to pee? It's like, oh, that's got to be weird, like, adjustment going from pissing one way. Which I love, because that also, maybe those have a lot more connection to the episodes. And I kind of like how Ozark's openings, like, you have those symbols, they're symbolic to the episode. I just never pay as much attention to them as I should. I'm only saying it because, obviously the most recent Ozark dropped near the end of last month. Regardless. But the fact is, there was the opening where it showed Harry, like, practicing peeing. It's like, oh, this is the right way, and pissing in your pants is the wrong way. So maybe if I paid more attention to those, I'd realize, like, oh, there's correlations to, like, the actual episodes in some regards. But and I love the whole thing of just Asta being like, shit, Harry, shit. And he's like, right here. And she's like, no, Harry. All right, let's get this done, because he's like, right, like, you want us to find a different, I'll sit here and wait for our people to basically come here and vaporize all of humanity and melt you guys like crayons in an oven or something like that. So, kind of had to go with the idea. She changed clothes, and I love it so much that they showed us what it looks like in his real form, wearing the outfit, the boobs and everything. I was like, this is too good. And he gets the device, and her coworker, who she talked about, like, grabbing her butt and everything, starts grabbing on him, and Harry, like, tosses him around like a rag doll. And it's like, oh, I put him in his place. She's like, Asta's like, what did you do? And he was like, the same thing you would do if you had basically the power, the strength of, like, 6 gorillas or something like that. So, but he was like, oh man, this sucks. Like, all women. Oh, like, it's like, no, what Carlin has to go through isn't just about her being short, it's about all women. It's like, wait, all women have to do it? It's like, yeah, when a woman tells you something, maybe next time you listen, you'll sit down, you shut up and listen, and the only thing coming out your mouth will be yes ma'am. Which I love that does come full circle, because Sahar comes and confronts Harry because she's been helping out with Max, whose hair is now growing out of his back. And I love that she's like saying, like, oh yeah, Western culture tell us stuff that from our natural bodies that we have to take out, stuff that we have to put in and stuff like that, and bleaching every visible aspect of our bodies, which I'm like, you say that, but even the non-visible ones, which eventually can become visible, which I'm, an asshole, because you hear people bleach their ass, so which is like, that's weird, okay. And I love that, like, Max tries to justify being like, being a man is tough too. I have to brush my teeth sometimes. I love these stars. Like, you know what? Never mind. I'm going to enjoy this, and rips the hair off his back because she's waxing it. Because apparently they found the Jeep that David and Lisa had, and they're just like, because they just abandoned it. I wonder, did they actually abandon it, or do they still come back to it from time to... Who knows? Because we see David at one point in time trying to get some information from the general, but things aren't going too well, so that's going to be interesting. I like that we're just like tackling that little by little each time, so... Because the only other time we saw him wasn't that last episode? Or was that episode 1 when Darcy stopped? Might have been episode 1? I don't remember now. I think it was episode 1 when like Darcy stopped by Ethan's place and David was there. So, but Sahara is the one like researching stuff. Found out it's like no, like going into space should actually cut your testosterone in half, but it seems like yours is increasing. And then he gets close to her and he was like has a deeper voice and everything, and she's like, no. And she's the one that ended up figuring out, and she confronts Harry, and it's like, right, you knew what was going on, and you didn't say anything, so we're keeping your ball, and you're just going to, like, leave it at that. And he was kind of like, yes, he just sat there, and he was like, yes, ma'am, and she's like, okay. So, I'm curious to see, well, because he already used the other ones now, so the only ball that's left is the one that was, that Max has, so I'm curious, like, under what circumstances that's going to get used and what that's going to be, especially because Sahara's like, oh, I hid it, so either he's going to need it later on, and it's not going to be where Sahara thought it was, because either someone's going to find it beforehand before Harry needs it, or just someone just in general is going to find it, and it's going to lead to some shenanigans. We'll have to wait and see, but other than that, obviously, you know, Liv got her new car, which I'm like, oh, good, because I don't see Mike giving you a raise legitimately anytime soon, even though you deserve it, because once again, you're a better cop than Mike is. But you also had Darcy throwing out flyers, in particular, like, Mike was like, oh, you can't put these up because of blah, 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 so she got on a plane and started disseminating them from the top, so... It all worked out, and I love that Ben was about to tell Kate the truth, and it's like, yeah, I'm gonna get started on this, because he knows, like, yeah, probably not a good idea to tell her, because you've also seen the darker side of your wife because of recent events and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, things are good, plus her and Darcy are becoming really close, so who am I to really kind of jeopardize that? It's more self-preservation, but still. So, okay, that's pretty interesting element to it. But we also see that Harry did fix his device. Considering what David is doing, I wonder will there... Well, and also the government and everything, too. There's the government, but there's also potentially David being relatively in the area. He could end up tracing that signal that Harry is trying to put out to his people. We'll see whether that's a success or not. It's going to be interesting to see how much... Harry continues to grow. Obviously, he grew a lot last season, but he continues to need even more growth this season. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. What lessons Harry learned from this episode will he continue to grow upon and expand upon in the next episode? We'll have to wait and see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.